My comings and goings are the comings and goings of wind. I am the word the wind mutters. Pay me no mind. Though I serve beauty and not mankind, the voice is the bird of a word wind gives wings to. I am the blackbird of the ruined nest who sings, all is beauty to the blind.
Pádraic Fiacc began his poetical journey in the melting pot of New York. Then returning to his home city, he engaged robustly in verse with the tumult that he found there. The Ulster History Circle is delighted to commemorate this acclaimed poet with a blue plaque close to his birthplace.
This is Falls Road Library, and it's particularly appropriate for our plaque today to the Belfast poet Pádraic Fiacc. Number one, he's a writer, a poet, but also it's just round the corner that he was born, because he was born in Elizabeth Street, which was once off Albert Street. Elizabeth Street doesn't exist anymore. Within about 4 or 5 years, Patrick Joseph O'Connor, or Joe as he always was to his friends, he followed his father over to New York. So Fiacc's poetry moves between, his boyhood in New York and when he came back here in the early 70s, the mayhem that had broken out on the streets here.
Pádraic died in 2019 and he was penniless. He never profited from his work to any great extent. But that meant he could speak and say what he wanted. And he did. He challenged authority. He had always a soft spot for the poor and those worst affected by war, and I admired that in his work, his sensitivity to ordinary people. And even the time he spent in this locality, he wrote poems about the war that was happening here in the 70s, and a lot of people didn't like that. So Pádraic didn't give a damn. People say, oh, he risked his reputation and he was risking it, but really Pádraic didn't give a damn about reputation. He wanted to get a message out there.
The thing that comes to mind immediately is his attempt to make sense of what was happening on the streets of Belfast. Sociologists make an attempt to give us the goods on that. Historians make an attempt to give us the goods. I think often many of us feel that one, and I may be biased here of course, that one really has to go to the poets to figure out what in fact is going on in a society.
His poetry, his images could be quite brutal. There was an incident in which 2 children were killed playing in a street near their home by an explosion. And Fiacc wrote a poem, and it contains the lines, 2 wee girls in Halloween dresses, burnt to death as witches. Now that is quite stark for a poet writing at the time. And some of his fellow poets decided, their view was it's too raw, it's too immediate. He should be stepping back from this. He should be more tentative. He maybe shouldn't be writing about it at all. But he was honest. He showed us ourselves and the awful things we do to each other, not just during the Troubles here, but also in life. But as well as anger, there was pity and there was sorrow. And that comes across very forcibly from the poems.
I think he's too much sidelined into one particular type that fitted the narrative at the time, potentially for, say, other poets. The Belfast poetry scene, when you're trying to establish an identity, you inherently exclude, unfortunately, no matter how great that cause is. I feel he was too ahead of his time for people to digest, but I think now is the time for him. He speaks to the common person, he speaks of trauma globally. He grew up in such a mix in the post-Second World War. He was an adult in the melting pot of New York. He had a similar background to, say, like the beat poets in Ginsberg and these revolutionary artists, and that's what he brought back. We weren't ready for it here, but now we are.
It's wrong to think of him solely as a poet of the Troubles. That's partly true, but it's more than that. Because he took his themes from Celtic legends. There are religious themes in his poetry. And also there's a strong modernist element to his poetry. He knew, for example, the painter Francis Bacon. And he was very interested in those modernist themes in writing and in art.
His earlier poems, completed in New York, 1940s, especially some of the ones about the ethnic cleansing of Indians, were superb poems, very delicate. And some of the poems about birds. He was a tremendous ornithologist, and his poems about birds are unbelievable. His observation of them, and even those poems he invested as traits within the birds that people had as well. You know, a wonderful guy, wonderful, lovely man.
Back in New York, he met a venerable Irish poet who was living there at the time called Pádraic Fiacc. Now, what happened was, Pádraic Fiacc said to him, you need to take inspiration from your Irish roots. So, in tribute, Joe O'Connor changed his name because Colm is dove in Irish, so Fiacc is raven in Irish. So there was a kind of a symmetry that he liked between the two.
I myself arrived in Belfast in 1969 and lived here until 1986, so I saw a great deal of him over those years. And the great thing about Pádraic Fiacc was he was a poet through and through. You know, there was no doubt about whether or not he was a poet. He was a poet. You know, starting with the hair, which he, like myself, he combed once a year. And so he was a fabulous character.
By a happy coincidence, it's exactly 10 years ago this month that some of us were gathered at this very spot to unveil a plaque on this historic and impressive library to the renowned actor J.G. Devlin. Today, his plaque from August 2015 is joined by one commemorating another creative spirit born in the Falls.
The Blue Plaque has been an ambition for a lot of people, and to have Pádraic honoured with a Blue Plaque here on this hub building, hub of this community, it's just wonderful, wonderful. And it also brings Pádraic Fiacc to a lot more people.
It's been a long time coming. Basically, I've been part of the kind of initiative for the past few years to try and establish Fiacc as the poet of Belfast that he always should have been. His critical acclaim, you know, has been sadly missed, and it's just such a momentous day to get him acknowledged on his home turf. So there's a lot more to do, long road to go. But I'm here in the midway of a major task to kind of reposition Fiacc and his work.
I was talking to a wee man out the front here who takes tours up the road, Dinker Lenihan, and Dinker was talking to me about what's going on here next week. And I said, who's he? So I read him a couple of poems, and Dinker says, look, when I bring my tourists up, I'm going to talk about that plaque and that man who was born just not far away. So things happen, the energy sort of moves about between people and between organisations, and that's what we want for Pádraic, because he's been too long in the doldrums. You know, he needs to be out there, his work needs to be out there in front of more people, in the curriculum, for example. And, yeah.
I think it's fabulous. You know, there's a lot of talk about poets and how we feel about them and how great we think they are. And I'm sure a lot of that is well-based, you know. But it's actually wonderful to see some physical evidence that there is a caring aspect in the community, that people actually are proud to honour Pádraic Fiacc. And he's up there at the moment with someone else I knew, J.G. Devlin, who was an actor with whom I worked many times in the BBC. And indeed, I had the privilege of making a couple of radio programmes with Pádraic Fiacc over the years. So not only did I know him as a poet, but I knew him as a writer of scripts.
President Higgins is an admirer and has been for a long number of years. He knew Pádraic Fiacc, Joe, and towards the end of his life, Joe was being looked after in a care home here in Belfast. And within days of his death in 2019, President Higgins paid him a visit. And he still recalls, in fact, we've had a message, a beautiful letter from President Higgins on the occasion of unveiling the plaque. And the President still treasures and cherishes the memory, the very moving time he spent with Joe, as I say, when Joe was in his last days of life. So that meant a lot to President Higgins, and the poetry still means so much to him.
I was completing my MA in Modern Literary Studies, and I was archiving some Michael Claverty letters, and I was interested in the dialogue, and I thought, who is this? And one of my colleagues has a PhD in Irish literature, and he said, well, this is Pádraic Fiacc, and I thought, why don't I know about this man? I was born in the Falls Road, I've grown up here, I have a strong interest in similar literature, poetry in particular, and that kind of modernist style. So I picked up a couple of collections in the library. I think it was Mise Terribilis, yeah, and In Red Earth, and I thought, this is phenomenal. Then Brendan Hamill, who was a friend and colleague of Fiacc, he would frequent the library, and I had a chat with him. He said he's in Hay Park Nursing Home. So I decided to write him a letter and say, hello, I am interested, would you mind a visitor? So I went, he replied, he rang me, and he would love that. So I called in, and we struck up a friendship, and I would visit him regularly, and we would have conversations, and I understood him. I understood the person he was, well, as far as one can. We had a similar dark wit. He came from the Falls Road, and I just thought, this is my PhD. I need to give him this position that he deserved.
That's what this plaque is about. That's why there's that blue plaque from the Ulster History Circle now permanently on the front of the Falls Road Library here, because Joe's back. He's in this room. You know, when I first saw this, I was very struck by the fact that it was bringing him back here. His words are back here. His words, if you like, through the plaque are on the street. And his voice is now back in that street, in the neighborhood where he started out in life. And, you know, that's a great, great feeling to have. And I'd love to hear, you know what? I'd love to hear what he would have said when he saw it. But it's very important to the Ulster History Circle.
It's absolutely moving, delighted. It's the start of a whole new era, as far as I'm concerned. It's only going to get more. Once people discover the aspects of their own community, and it's universal, it speaks to Palestinians, it speaks to everyone at the minute. Once they start to explore, I know it'll be received beautifully. They have a poet from their own land who talked about what it is to be traumatized, and talked about what it is to be human, to be hurt, and to be a human with other humans. So everyone has something to gain from that. So I'm incredibly proud to come from Falls Road as well, and to see this happen, and just can't wait to see what it brings next. You know, I'm completing my PhD eventually, but I have many other side projects as well to bring to this community and to bring to America, New York, everywhere that it needs to happen. So everywhere that touched Fiacc. So it's only the beginning. But very, very proud.